Hello, and a very warm welcome to this discussion on how the CIOB can embrace and facilitate the UN 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals. And this is in the context of the CIOB's stated mission to be the moral compass of the construction industry. My name is Kai Bangbola, and I am a fellow and sustainability ambassador for the CIOB. And it is my great pleasure to be your chair for this event. I've been part of this great institution nearly 35 years, and I'm very pleased to say that I've met a lot of great members along the way. I'm a published author of 2 books on gold standard sustainability and reporting, and one has a section on sustainable development goals. My company was the official corporate sustainability reporting consultant to the London 2012 Sustainable Olympic Games. So you see, I've got some skin in the game as your chair. This event is for CIOB board members, trustees, and hub members. The presentation is an internal CIOB strategy presentation for its membership, and it's not for commercial use. In some ways, this is longhand for "we did this just for you." The presentation will be recorded, and at the end of the event, you'll be able to receive an email that will ask for your feedback. Recordings will also be available on the CIOB Academy. Now, our main speaker today is David Stockdale, and David will give a comprehensive explanation of the importance of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in providing a framework for the CIOB's global work around sustainability to ensure that we achieve global impact as a wider industry. Our panelists today, well, we know Eddie Tuttle, who's our Director of Policy, Public Affairs and Research, who provides our management team with strategic advice and guidance. Eddie works closely with government ministers, senior civil servants, and a variety of other regulatory and legislative bodies. And he's recently written about the Global Construction Accords. Our panelists also include Felicity Handley, CIOB Public Affairs Officer, who has been very active utilising her journalistic and public relations skills. I feel assured what you will hear is accurate because Felicity is adept at addressing misinformation from her previous incarnations. Felicity has recently written about climate change and the role of construction in meeting net zero. So, today, my friends, we have a few of the CIOB's finest to put your questions and queries to. Please get your live questions in early to avoid disappointment. As chair, I'm very much looking forward to dropping in a conversation piece or two of my own, because this is a great subject. The UN Sustainable Development Goals aim to deliver prosperity for all on a healthy planet. They are premised on the pledge, no one gets left behind. And this is all encapsulated within 17 goals. Suffice to say, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are one of the most important topics of the day, at the forefront of any sizable organization's chief executive's mind. The focus is global policy to local action. It is top of the agenda at the COP, and we want to involve you in the discussion because future prosperity will depend on you and your organizations being able to demonstrate that you are part of the solution. Now, in this week that the UK Chancellor announced mandatory corporate reporting for all organisations in the UK and their international operations, it doubles down on the need to measure and disclose environmental social governance performance, because this will form the basis of investor decision making for us and for our clients. So this is an opportune time to have this conversation. To be clear what's at stake, if we become sustainable, we all win. If we remain unsustainable, we all lose. And this brings me neatly into our chat today. Our mission members is to respond to our real issues like, why should the construction industry miss out on the benefits of sustainable development? We didn't on the Olympics, but that was a decade ago. So, no pressure. Let's talk about UN Sustainable Development Goals that leaves no one behind. Some of you may know our key speaker, David Stockdale. He is a fellow of the CIOB and he's a member of the CIOB Policy Board. He's also a chartered environmentalist and the founder of Brigger Consulting. David's extensive experience of major infrastructure, building and community regeneration projects bring him face to face with sustainable development goal issues that we will all encounter and are all encountering in our work within the sector. And we must all find solutions to bring a transformational shift to business thinking. Over to you, David.
Hello and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Dave Stockdale and I'd like to introduce you to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and also the potential of their framework to be the CIOB's new moral compass. Today's presentation is in two parts and its purpose is to initially review the Sustainable Development Goals framework, to subsequently explore how the CIOB could use this framework for the benefit of its global membership moving forward. A blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The Sustainable Development Goals were agreed in 2015. And the key words for me on this slide are transforming our world, a global commitment, a bottom-up process, and that national strategies are required. SDGs are a special kind of policy, a hybrid form of governance arrangement. Again, the key words for me on this slide are open framework, and also it's up to the national governments to apply the framework to their specific contexts. That is to connect the dots. So what do we mean connect the dots in the context of a national framework? It means being able to associate one goal with another and to find the big picture for a particular country in terms of their specific needs. The CIOB should adopt the goals framework, mapping its current and future policies to individual goals, demonstrating their commitment to the goals and strengthening their global influence as a result. The CIOB's mission is to contribute to the creation of a modern, progressive and responsible construction industry, able to meet the economic, environmental and social challenges faced in the 21st century. The CIOB's values are about creating extraordinary people through professional learning and continuous professional development. The mission and values of the goals complement the CIOB mission, values and moral expectations of our global membership. The 17 goals as a package indicate a working definition of what sustainable development is. They are close to the concept of a green economy, and they are meant to be integrated and implemented together. They are an open framework with some predefined variables in the form of goals, targets and indicators for measurement. It's up to the national governments to apply the framework to their specific contexts. The goals state a number of problems to be solved individually in each country. The strategies are up to individual governments to design within the global framework. The relevant question is not what should be done, the question is how. The goals are highly complex and are about highly contested political issues which need to be discussed and addressed within the individual countries. The main message of Goal 1 is that economic growth is important and that discrimination of the poor must end. Looking at this slide, just consider just how big Africa is. Africa's landmass is just about as big as that of China, India, Western and Eastern Europe, the United States and Japan combined. This goal focuses on hunger, which is closely related to the issue of extreme poverty, which is Goal 1. It points to factors to increase food production, but within environmental limits. It is in this sense parallel to Goals 8 and 9. About a third of all food that is produced globally is lost to pests or spoilage in the supply chain or as consumer waste. Preventing just a quarter of this loss could feed nearly 1 billion people a year, save nearly £250 billion and significantly reduce global greenhouse gas emissions as a result. When people are in good health, societies prosper. This goal states a number of health-related problems. However, it offers little in terms of how to solve these problems. This slide really poses no great surprises. In high-income countries, the majority of people who die are old, but in low-income countries, children under the age of 5 account for 1 in 3 deaths. Goal 4 is all about ensuring everyone has access to learn, no matter who they are or where they are. Overall, the trend is upwards from the 1970s. And in terms of post-secondary and upper secondary pupils, no education, as you can see from the right-hand side, has reduced significantly. Goal 5 is targeted on achieving gender equality. That is, equal access to education, healthcare and decent work, which can only benefit societies. Women average 2.6 times as much time on unpaid care and domestic work as men do. This goal has strong links to the environmental goals. It states the desired ends and suggests some means to achieve them, primarily management systems and protection of ecosystems. Globally, 60% of people use sanitation facilities that are not safely managed and may contribute to the spread of disease. Much of the world's fresh water is polluted. Energy is the dominant contributor to climate change, accounting for around 60% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Goal 7 is connected to Goals 1, 9, 12 and 13. Goal 7 focuses on clean and renewable energy, but gives only a few suggestions on what needs to be done, apart from some support for developing countries. Energy is typically measured in watts. Unfortunately, 1 watt is an incredibly small number, and so to make energy numbers usable, engineers use multiples of 1,000 watts. For example, kilo, mega, giga, and tera. A terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts and is used to describe country-level consumption, whereas a gigawatt of energy will run a mid-sized city. A kilowatt of energy would run a house. When you look at this slide, you can see that in 2019 oil and gas dominate. However, oil is pretty flat, but coal has dramatically reduced and gas has increased since the 1970s to the present day. Goal 8 takes a strong position in favour of economic development and spells out some of the factors which are important for the national economy. Productivity, entrepreneurship and employment are 3 key factors. The goal also points out restriction in terms of reducing the burden on the environment. The poorest 50% of the world's population is responsible for just 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The poorest countries are often the most likely to experience the worst effects of the climate crisis and have done the least to cause it. Goal 9, in simple terms, states that for a society to grow, it should encourage industries that bring opportunities to everyone while protecting the environment. It's also very similar to Goal 8 in that it outlines important factors for economic growth and balances this with concerns for the environment. The number of internet users in Africa almost doubled in the past 4 years, but more than 4 billion people do not use the internet, and 90% of them are from the developing world. Goal 10 seeks to make sure everyone, everywhere, has a chance to live a healthy and happy life. The developed world versus the developing world is sharply depicted on this slide. Half of humanity, some 3.5 billion people, lives in cities today, but 828 million people live in slums, and the number keeps rising. This goal is the bridge between the social dimension and the environmental dimension. It states a few ends to be achieved and suggests some means to do this, mainly by support for developing countries and strengthened planning. Goal 11 is connected to Goals 3, 6, 10 and 12. The speed of urban growth is mind-boggling. By 2060, the world's building stock is projected to double. That's like putting up a city like New York every month for 40 years. And it's mainly because of growth in developing countries like China, India and Nigeria. Even if the rich world could magically get to net zero today, the rest of the world will still be emitting more and more. Cities occupy 1% of the world's land, yet are home to about 55% of the human population. Cities account for 75% of total energy consumption and 80% of total carbon emissions. In 2017, there were 29 cities with more than 10 million people. By 2030, there will be 43 of them, and 14 will be home to more than 20 million. Goal 12 is connected to Goals 6, 7, 11 and 15. Goal 12 wants us to make us think twice about the things we use, the waste we create, and how that impacts our planet, changing our behaviour towards more sustainable actions. The largest middle-class consumer market today is in the United States and Western Europe. The largest middle-class consumer market projected to be in 2030 will be China. Households consume 29% of global energy, contributing 21% of global CO2 emissions. The true source of greenhouse gas emissions essentially comes down to unsustainable human behaviour. This goal is connected to goals 3, 7, 8 and 12. Goal 13 is about finding solutions like renewable energy and clean technologies to fix climate change. But it also will take actions from governments, the private sector and civil society to make a significant impact. There are two numbers you ought to know about the climate. 51 billion is how many tonnes of greenhouse gases the world typically adds to the atmosphere each year, and net zero is where we need to get to. Something like 20% of the carbon dioxide emitted today will still be there in the atmosphere in 10,000 years. The wealthiest 10% of people in the world are responsible for 50% of global emissions. The biggest emitter today is China, but over the past century, most greenhouse gases have come from the developed economies of Europe and North America. This slide shows us the consequences of inertia and how dangerous global greenhouse gas emissions will be to our planet. It should concentrate people's minds. Goal 14 is about protecting the oceans, seas and all its species. Oceans cover 75% of the Earth's surface, contain 97% of the Earth's water and represent 99% of the living space on the planet by volume. 2015 data on primary plastic production by industrial sector placed packaging at 146 million tonnes top of the list. Second was building and construction at 65 million tonnes per year. Textiles at 59 million tonnes and the other sectors at 47 million tonnes. 8.3 billion metric tonnes of plastic that we have ever produced still exists, and roughly 75% of it has become plastic waste. Of that amount, less than 10% has been recycled. We're all part of the global ecosystem. Goal 15 is about making sure that we stop all the things that threaten our global home. This includes deforestation, land degradation, and the loss of animal and plant species. Around 1.6 billion people depend on forests for their livelihood. This includes 70 million indigenous people. And forests are home to more than 80% of all animals and plants. Agriculture plays a huge part in the build-up of global greenhouse gases. For example, 33% of the grain produced across the world is used to feed livestock, and 70 billion animals are raised every year for human consumption. Forests are vital to the Earth's climate, but they have been disappearing fast. By 2011, 50% of the world's original forests had been cut down by humans, mostly to create space for new farmland. 37% of the world's habitable land is forest, and between 1990 and 2015 we lost 880 football pitches worth of forest every hour. Goal 16 is about finding ways to make sure everyone lives in a peaceful society and don't have to live in fear. The goal can be read as support for the general idea that good governance and state capacity is important for development and for policies in general. Please know that this is a perception index only. To make all the goals a reality will require the participation of everyone. That includes governments, the private sector, civil society, organisations such as the CIOB. The population of the Earth is predicted to stabilise at 11 billion in 2100. There are 8 times as many people on Earth today as there were 200 years ago. China, with a population of 1.4 billion, has more people than any other country. India, currently at 1.35 billion population, is growing fast and is expected to overtake that of China. Goals 1, 8, 9 and 10 are primarily focused on the economy. These goals talk about the means to reduce poverty, that is, to increase wealth in poor countries. The implicit assumption underlying the goals is that the only viable route moving forward is to reduce carbon emissions, eliminate global poverty, and ensure that the development is sustainable. The goals are not accompanied by an examination whether, assuming they are achieved, that they are sustainable. Sustainable economic growth requires a different measure than the traditional GDP, one that is more sensitive to our impact on our natural assets that results from our current unsustainable consumerism, that has the viewpoint that we are external somehow to the natural world and not actually embedded within it. Our current stance has given rise to a paradox, that growth in global GDP is seen as necessary for providing funds that will be needed for reducing our ecological footprint, our impact on the planet. Even though growth in global GDP is known to increase the ecological footprint. However, new frameworks for measuring economic progress are being developed, in many cases through the United Nations, for example, for natural capital accounting and assessments. There are 7 goals which address social issues. Goals 2 to 7 and 11. These social goals can be read as illustrations of the specific problems which affect people who live in poverty. However, some of them are clearly relevant for rich countries. These goals are more focused on ends than on means, especially in comparison to the goals on the economic dimension. There are 4 goals which relate to traditional environmental concerns, goals 12 to 15. The environmental goals contain a list of ends to be achieved and relate to some key behaviour, such as production and consumption, as well as to nature in a broad sense, climate, land and sea. The environmental goals makes reference to economic resources as a means to solve some of the problems, for example through technological development. In other words, economic activity is a problem as well as a solution to the environmental problems. This is a fundamental dilemma, and there is little explicit guidance in the goals on how to deal with this dilemma. The final 2 goals, 16 and 17, highlight overlapping issues which can be interpreted as prerequisites to reach other goals. They address issues of implementation, especially the role of governments and the role of international support. The international support relates to important issues to help developing countries catch up with the developed countries, such as technology development and capacity building. There is a problem with the goals. They are not accompanied by an economic analysis that examines whether once they are achieved, that they are sustainable. We simply have to move away from the current viewpoint that humanity is external to the natural world. That is, business as usual, that extracts from nature's goods and services, then transforms them for our unsustainable lifestyles, and then discharging our production and consumption back into nature's waste. There has to be a recognition that we humans are embedded in the natural world. This change in economic viewpoint will guide our conception of future economic strategic possibilities. National accounting systems do not track humanity's use of nature's goods and services. GDP does not record the depreciation nor possible appreciation of nature's capital, such as water quality, soils, minerals, plants, air, animals, food, health, and coastal protection. The goals have to be general to apply to all countries, which means there is a need to adjust the goals to the specific situation in each country. It becomes necessary for national governments to adopt the general framework to the local circumstances in their nations. We're now coming to the end of part one of the presentation. Looking at this slide is a message that is loud and clear. It's our impact on the environment that has resulted in this situation. Our unsustainable consumerism. It's down to us. Welcome to part two of my presentation. The world is changing drastically before our eyes. Will the CIOB be prepared for what comes next? We need to think about working out the how for the CIOB, for example, strategic alliances, partnerships, and capacity building in knowledge and best practice. In what way? What's the route, the method, techniques and processes involved? In what manner? What's the style, the modus operandi? And by what means? Resources and expertise. The CIOB is a global brand and is trusted. It has a global reputation and professional membership that influence and reach out. It has a new governance structure and is an industry leader in digitalization of the construction process through BIM. Our codes of practice influence the construction industry in best practice in terms of project management and development, design management, quality, and other important subjects such as site management and the new International Certificate in Construction Management. It also highlights the social value of construction. The CIOB infrastructure, for example, the CPD Academy, is second to none. Its collective knowledge and intellectual capital throughout the CIOB organisation is a positive strength. There is an increasing acceptance of the need to ensure construction projects provide social value rather than simply economic value. If you look at bullet point 5. So how is the construction industry developing and supporting social enterprise and social value, and for whom? How and when is the industry recording and measuring social value and its effect? Which organisations are doing things well, and what can we learn from our experiences globally? There are 3 weaknesses, in my view, on this list. The first is a general lack of awareness in the CIOB of the United Nations goals. This despite their creation since 2015, some 6 years ago. It is a weakness because a lot's happened in those 6 years in terms of developing the goals and reviewing the goals. So it's imperative that this general lack of awareness should be addressed. The second weakness, a myopic view, is basically stating, are we anchored within the United Kingdom and the UK, for example, house building sector? 10 years ago, we had very strong links with the Chinese construction industry and a Chinese national as our president. Since then, we appear, perception is everything, that we are moving backwards within the borders of the UK. And the question is, are we shapers of the built environmental landscape, or just a figure in that landscape? The final bullet point basically states a lack of ambition regarding a proactive global influence on shaping the future in adapting to climate change. We have to learn pretty quickly in terms of the issues, the science, and the implications for the built environment and the global built environment in order to raise the game in terms of catching up on learning what the influences that we can address and promote for the CIOB for the Sustainable Development Goals. The caveat there being the goals that are relevant to the global built environment. We live in a global community and we have a global membership. Is the CIOB critically reviewing its global role and the aspiration of its stated mission and values? That's the question. So what are the opportunities for the CIOB? These are 4 key themes that I think that the CIOB can take as opportunities in terms of strategy and policy. The first bullet point basically deals with 2 key stakeholders for the future. School children who will inherit what we do today, and the millennials, the people who have to deliver the carbon transition economy and be prepared for climate change mitigation. What's stopping the CIOB professionals doing their CPD by getting involved with school children, forming partnerships with schools, leading projects, leading presentations to all interested parties? It's the school children who will inherit what we do today, and the millennials who will have to deal with it. Also, forming strategic partnerships with the sustainable finance community and impact investors is critical, in my opinion. The strategic advantage of that is that by equipping our professionals to help their professionals to achieve what they will be forced to have to deal with in terms of targets, stakeholder investors, impact investors and the like. It has to be done, and it has to be done quickly, but we have to be credible. We want them to come to us, and that could be done through the CIOB Academy, through courses, etc. Following on from that, the third bullet point, I believe we need to create a new CIOB qualification. Environmental, social and governance, ESG. We need to become a key critical friend to the key stakeholders in sustainable finance and in government. Again, that could be facilitated via the CIOB Academy. Finally, the final bullet point, in my opinion, an opportunity now arises to recalibrate the professional membership route to include a requirement to study environmental science in building and sustainable construction management. The time has now come to put environmental science and sustainability up front and centre for future professionals moving forward. The CIOB Global Sustainability Strategy should be able to 1. Explain the planet's social and environmental challenges. 2. Understand and communicate the ethos of the United Nations goals. 3. Understand the transition of the decarbonisation of the economic system as it impacts on the global built environment. 4. Explain the CIOB's role and how it can be applied to global sustainable development. 5. Embrace Goal 4, the learning goal, and Target 4.7 via the CIOB Academy. Is the CIOB providing the necessary tools to help facilitate the goals? That's the question. In my opinion, there are 5 threats to the CIOB. First one is becoming sidelined. Everybody's moving forward and we're not moving fast enough. Another threat is missing opportunities. What's on our stakeholder map in adapting to climate change is the one. If we don't, we'll maybe be missing opportunities, strategic opportunities and tactical opportunities. I still firmly believe that we need to create new corporate membership for a world that is relevant and not that's already gone. And I say that in terms of we need to have professionals who understand what the issues are, technical, social, environmental, and be able to look over the horizon to help and facilitate and develop so that facilitation and facilitation services can be achieved as a strategic opportunity. The other threat is inertia. We need to change culture, attitudes and moral obligations to our children and grandchildren. I firmly believe that this is a threat that can be turned to the CIOB's strategic advantage by getting involved with schools, universities and tertiary education to bring out the message and strategically to attract new members. We need to get out there and walk the talk, for want of a better word. We need to be on the front foot, not on the back foot. And the final threat, in my opinion, is intellectual isolation. We have to be able to have a practical knowledge in terms of key management issues moving forward. We have to have influence, and it has to be a global influence. We have to develop areas of expertise. And the overall question is, are we providing the required professional development route and the required professional qualification route that actually will equip our members for the future and avert all these threats that are on this slide. Somebody once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic. And that's a key message for this slide. Goal 4 relates to a quality education. And the slide shows Target 4.7. The CIOB has the capacity to facilitate this target via its commitment to its mission statement and values. The The CIOB is rightly proud to be considered to be the international voice of the construction management professionals, representing an equal body of knowledge concerning the management of the total construction process. The CIOB Academy is well positioned to facilitate Goal 4, Target 4.7. These are global issues and requires the CIOB to adopt a key leadership role. The younger generation is interested and involved as primary stakeholders in sustainable development, which includes preventing a climate change disaster and being involved with adaptation and mitigation actions of change. They will have to live with this in the future. What's required is trust, communication and commitment. Trust that what we are doing as a professional global community is morally right. Effective communication of CIOB policies is paramount, and a commitment to deliver our policies. The CIOB's mission is to contribute to the creation of a modern, progressive and responsible construction industry, able to meet the economic, environmental and social challenges faced in the 21st century. The new moral compass will be an internalized set of values and objectives that guide us with regard to ethical behaviour and decision making. This slide is a recap of how the CIOB should develop to embrace the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and is primarily focused on the millennial age of CIOB global membership, for it is they that will have to deal and live with the consequences of our current climate change crisis. These CIOB members will have to have the knowledge and experience to deal with rapid economic and technological change like no other CIOB global membership cadre has had to deal with before. So what legacy will the current Chartered Institute of Building Global Community leave to future generations of our children and grandchildren? The challenge for CIOB policymakers is to address how existing policies can be mapped to the Sustainable Development Goal framework, and new policies to enhance the capacity of the CIOB to respond to requests for their collective experience and expertise in delivering the goals. Education, communication, facilitation and influence will be the key drivers in terms of CIOB policy development. Sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In addition to natural resources, we also need social and economic resources. Sustainability is not just environmentalism. Embedded in most definitions of sustainability, we also find concerns for social equity and economic development. The CIOB Global Sustainability Strategy should be able to 1. Explain the planet's social and environmental challenges. 2. Understand the United Nations goals. 3. Understand the transition of the economic system. And 4. Explain the CIOB's role and how it can be applied to sustainable development. Quoting Ban Ki-moon, the former United Nations Secretary General, "We are the first generation that can end poverty and the last generation that can take steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change." By mid-century, climate change could be just as deadly as COVID-19, and by 2100 it could be 5 times as deadly. In terms of economic impacts in the next decade or two, the economic damage caused by climate change will likely be as bad as having COVID-19 sized pandemics every 10 years. And by the end of the 21st century, it will be much worse if the world remains on its current emissions path. Sustainable development can be defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Goal 17, which is strengthen the means of implementation and revitalise the global partnership for sustained development, is the last but no means the least on the global goals agenda. It underpins the entire framework. The United Nations is clear that the goals can only be realised if an enabling environment for collaborative action is created. This should be adopted by the CIOB and its global professional membership in collaboration with its strategic partners and stakeholders. This should be the new moral compass within the CIOB corporate plan. Thank you for attending today's presentation. I hope that you have found it enlightening and thought-provoking. You have been a wonderful audience.
Let's thank David Stockdale in the time-honoured way for the clarity with which he has set out the context of the goals and, in the second part, the robust but direct invitation to act. Thank you, David. I will now gather the panel together, Mr. Eddie Tuttle, Felicity Handley and David Stockdale, of course, to answer your questions. So relax or get your fingers tapping, tap out those questions on the Q&A button. Feel free to vote them up as we provide the responses. This is the Q&A period of our CIOB Sustainable Development Goals policy discussion. If my panelists would like to unmute, let's kick off with the first question. And the first question is, what work is the CIOB currently undertaking in sustainability? And that's to address to all of the panel. And who would like to go first?
I'll go first, Kai. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent stuff. The CIOB has developed a number of internal working initiatives on the principles of social value, and we are currently reviewing an internal audit report against a number of different social value measures and calculations. As part of this review, we are asking the assessing organisation to consider the UN's sustainability goals and how the CIOB can demonstrate awareness and support of the 17 goals. On initial assessment, I would say UN Sustainability Goal 4 on quality and education is a core aspect of the operation of the CIOB and the stewardship of standards and accreditations, and the focus on keeping and enhancing the quality of qualifications linked to the SDG very well. We also, as part of the sustainability goal number 9, which refers to build resilience and infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable and innovation, we are a champion of innovation and inclusive approaches in the built environment, and the CIOB meets many of the requirements already of this goal as well. And in terms of SDG 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe and resilient and sustainable, the CIOB ensures that the built environment is the central feature here, and the work we do on quality of buildings and environments is central to this. as is the sustainability of our cities and communities. The CIOB does work extensively to address these issues, both at a national government level, but locally as well. And in terms of the goal number 13, take urgent action against combating climate change and its impacts. The built environment accounts for appropriately 10% of carbon emissions in the UK, and therefore is a key area for the government's net zero carbon target in terms of both the construction strategy in the UK, but also strategies in global arenas as well. And CIOB is working on the reduction of carbon emissions, is key to the ethical drive of the CIOB more generally. And I should also say on SDG 17 partnerships and for the goals, the CIOB collaborates worldwide and therefore is ideally placed to facilitate the sharing of information and best practice in the 100+ countries where the Institute has members. And, you know, I see this as a key driver for CIOB moving forward in terms of engaging in the frameworks that apply globally and getting the CIOB's head above the parapet in global regions where perhaps we're not first port of call. So I see the SDG goals and targets as key to actually driving forward CIOB's input into this arena this coming over the coming months and coming years. Absolutely key driver for us and a key opportunity for CIOB to bring its name into the conversation in a global sense, not just in a UK sense where we do a lot of work with governments, etc., etc. Okay, I hope that answers that one.
And would you like to add anything, David or Felicity?
Yeah, if I can just add a few things on Eddie's point, there are a couple of initiatives that CIOB is currently involved in, which kind of directly going towards our action on sustainability as a professional institute. So the first is the Construction Industry Council's Climate Change Panel. And the panel is a kind of time-limited project that's being put together ahead of COP26. So we're participating in various work streams there, looking at education and qualifications, and also professional standards, competence, advocacy and ethics to see how our kind of qualifications framework and our reputation as a professional body can contribute towards positive sustainable practice in the industry. Ahead of COP26, we're also in discussion with the UK GBC on putting together a built environment virtual pavilion. So that will be a chance to showcase some of the sustainability initiatives that CIOB is taking forward, but also the broader industry on a global scale, with a real emphasis on kind of innovative solutions and sustainable building practice. We are also sitting on the RICS Carbon Database Steering Group, which is looking at putting together a standardized database of embodied carbon usage in construction products and asset lifecycle management. So that's a slightly more technical action, but one that's obviously really crucial because we can't start to improve sustainability of the built environment until we can measure it properly. And then the final kind of big action that we're currently working on is through membership of the Construction Leadership Council's Domestic Repair, Maintenance and Improvement Working Group. So obviously the built environment in the UK constitutes about 40% of our entire emissions. And retrofitting the existing building stock is crucial in order to improve the sustainability of the built environment and also reaching the net zero target. So that's one way in which we're looking at the actions that need to be taken to improve the energy efficiency of the built environment. And the actions that companies need to take, but also professional institutes moving forward. So I hope that provides a little bit of extra information about what we're doing on a specific sustainability front.
Yeah, I think just to re-emphasize what Felicity said, there's a heck of a lot of collaboration ongoing across the industry, both with the professions and the industry itself. And the work of the Construction Leadership Council directly with government is crucial to this. And we do play our part in ensuring that the message is clear. And what I would like to see is that widening out into the more global regions as well. And I think the SDGs give us a fine opportunity to use that framework to actually both address the issue and also get CIOB at the right table and global sense as well. Thank you.
Can I just say something in terms of the question, the motivation of why I did the presentation? What it does to me in terms of the motivation of doing the presentation you just heard is the recognition that the CIOB is undertaking work on sustainability, as eloquently described before. But I just take everybody back to the Royal Charter. And before I started the presentation, I thought, why am I doing this? But I looked at the Royal Charter, and basically the Royal Charter commits us to work in the public interest, which means we campaign on major issues such as climate change, sustainable development, eradicating modern slavery, improving the quality of the built environment. And we also have to ensure that the right skills, talent, and behaviours are nurtured in construction, and that our built environment is protected through more energy efficient buildings. So the work of the CIOB in sustainability, in my opinion, is completely compatible with the Royal Charter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. I think we can see that it's really good to hear that the CIOB are very active in a great number of areas. So it's not just one or two. There's a lot that's actually going on, as you've said. And in many ways, you've answered the second question, or there was a question that was asked with so many goals from the UN. Which goals would you say are most important to the CIOB? And you've articulated that, Eddie, by going through various of the goals and the reason why they're significant to the IOB. And we have another question that was raised, and it's a great question. At what level do you think the CIOB should look to guide the industry? Do we need to write our own step-by-step roadmap to help steer companies to reduce their impact and address climate impacts? Who would like to take that question?
I'll chip in there if you want. Basically, the point I was making in the presentation focused on two targets. One was 4.7, which was the quality education. And I think that education has to be addressed by the CIOB at all levels. And one of the recommendations I've made is that in terms of the levels of who we're targeting the SDGs at from the CIOB perspective, has to include schools. It has to include millennials. It has to include people who, quite frankly, need to be aware of the bigger picture, what's going on in the world. And in terms of education, I think that the CIOB has a world-leading academy for CPD that can be utilised to transform the schools in terms of their curriculum to include SDG topics, geography, mathematics, economics, always through the school program at whatever level and tertiary level. The CIOB can be a transformer and facilitator of the education of what the sustainability is all about, what the SDGs are all about. You've seen the world data maps that is on the presentation. It's all about being aware. But then when you look at the SDGs, you could actually put every SDG in some sort of curriculum subject area. So in terms of policy, in terms of the CIOB, the framework, which is an open framework on policy, works very well. But also when you look at it in terms of the way they're laid out, it also works out that it can be very good in terms of additional curricula. And what I'm proposing there is the CIOB Academy and its members should take advantage of CPD, but also you could do volunteer work or partnerships with local schools, the Department of Education or whatever. But the main thing is the CIOB should be the leader. It should be a transformational leader. And the reason why Target 4.7 is relevant is that when you read it, it maps perfectly to our CPD Academy, what they're capable of doing.
Yeah, I was certainly wouldn't disagree what you said, David. I think it's you know, from a CIOB perspective, it's about being strategic, and it's about being practical and getting that knowledge into the right networks. And you do have to start at schools, and we do need to ensure that we actually play a strategic role as well in helping governments arrive at the right decisions and practical ways of actually implementing those as well. So from my perspective, it's about raising our head above the parapet to a large degree and actually addressing some of the practical issues that need to be sorted out now.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, I think two really great points have been raised by both Eddie and David. And the first is the importance of collaboration in the sector. I think there are a lot of roadmaps currently being developed in terms of steering companies towards reducing their impact in a climate-based sense particularly. And it's important not to add to the noise at this point, because CIOB is already involved in a lot of these initiatives, and we can play a leading role in shaping how they move forwards and in also supporting our members to carry forward that action. So I would say that it's not so much about developing a roadmap, because that's very much something that is currently being constructed, but it's about figuring out how we can kind of utilize the academic potential of CIOB. We have a really great framework for educating our members through the academy, as David said, and that will play a really important role, I think, going forward in terms of supporting members to transition to net zero and to have the skills and the knowledge. And something stuck with me the other day when I was discussing this with a policymaker who told me that we already know what needs to be done to reach net zero. And so I think while roadmaps are very attractive, they can be really appealing. What's very important is actually how we operationalize the roadmaps that already exist, because there isn't new information that needs to be developed. It's how we take awareness of existing challenges and use CIOB's capabilities to educate our professionals and then the wider built environment sector step by step.
Yeah, and I think that needs a bit of a refresh in terms of how that practically applies on the ground. Roadmaps are clearly helpful, but we do work in an industry that's very good at coming up with roadmaps or frameworks to solutions which don't always work their way through and are practical on the ground. And I think CIOB, using its education framework, using the academy, can play a far more different and proactive role in actually helping people and organisations achieve what they need to do to actually meet the targets.
We're also getting some good questions in terms of our members are really good with their continuous professional development, CPD. And on the education and training front is a very important aspect. But the question of should we be showing organisations how to change their procurement to a more sustainable framework is a great question, because it's now moving into the flow of things from construction, from education to procurement, and then I'm sure we'll come on to construction. So have a look at that particular question and tell me your thoughts on it. So again, should we be showing organisations how to change their procurement to a more sustainable framework?
I think the short answer to that, Kai, is yes. I think we do need to be doing precisely that. And I think what you find with procurement protocols and frameworks there's a lot of information out there, but there's not, we get back to this practical level stuff where we need to be able to help people through the maze and understand what needs to be done and what can be achieved. And I think there's a role there for CIOB and a number of the professional organisations in this industry, both here in the UK and globally as well.
Fantastic. And if there's an international side to things, there's a great question here that says, unless anybody wants to come in on that previous question, I'm going to move on to the international, because the CIOB operates across the globe, as we well know. So do we see establishing a CIOB presence in countries like India as a way to establish sustainable development goals in terms of education of the built environment professionals in those countries? And so that's a nice joinder to the things that we've been saying, but looking at the international picture.
Well, I think in an international sense, we do need to join the dots, don't we? We do, as CIOB, need to bring something different into those global regions. And, you know, taking David's presentation around the UN sustainability goals, for instance, what a great framework and what a great way of actually engaging in the conversation and actually coming up with the practical solutions required for the industry and professionals in those particular countries. India is an interesting example, but that could equally apply to many other global regions as well. And from a policy point of view, we are looking to stretch our net much wider in a global sense, and sustainability and the sustainability goals will be a key cohort and helping us drive that work forward in the future.
I think the other thing to recognise is the fact that COP26, scheduled for November in Glasgow, will have on the agenda a truly international wish list, where people's, especially developing countries, will be saying, you know, one of the commitments that's going to be made, especially with the G7 recently finished, was the annual $100 billion fund that's going to be made available, albeit through private finance and various other blending, to developing countries. So to me, it stands to reason that the focus of COP26 will basically force these countries to say, I don't want to be left behind. You're telling me I'm not going to be left behind. Therefore, Mr. United Nations, can you tell me how do I access the funds and what do I do with them? So by COP26, there's your catalyst, where a lot of, I think, for example, Paris Agreement, 197 countries signed up for it. That doesn't mean to say that 197 countries have a policy in place. And therefore, one of the roles I envisage the CIOB is, I mean, come on. I mean, I believe what it says on the packet. We are the world's largest and most influential professional body for construction management and leadership. When you look at the SDGs, there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of adaptation. Come on, at the end of the day, we've a role embedded in the SDGs. What I'm saying is, what I'm suggesting is that we've become a leader in actually saying we can help you, because we have 46,500 members in the CIOB across the globe. You're telling me we can't tap into that and help? The key thing about the presentation is I'm not suggesting a roadmap. I agree with Felicity entirely with that. What I'm saying is we've got the membership, we've got the knowledge, we've got the know-how, we've got the experience to deal with SDGs of individual countries that have to address it. And the catalyst for addressing this is this November with COP26.
Excellent. Anyone else would like to share their views on the panel?
I would just add that I think establishing a presence is going to be important, but one of the key challenges, but also great opportunities for CIOB, is to develop models for taking the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also our priorities around sustainability as an organization, and transferring those to local contexts in a way that is culturally sensitive and specific, that applies to the local conditions of individual places, but that also provides a framework through which different countries can look at their own industries and use CIOB principles to try and ameliorate sustainable practices, if that makes sense. So it's about finding a framework that can be applied in different contexts and modeled in a way that is still sensitive to local conditions and meets the challenges that different kind of societies, but also different building sectors have on the ground.
Yeah, it takes us back to a degree to practicality and horses for courses almost. You actually have to develop the right approach in the right global region, and you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to it, I feel.
Now, amongst us, we've got a good share of diversity on this panel. And we've seen many articles over the years about diversity, construction, gender, the ethical side, and the need for fairness. And this is central to the Sustainable Development Goals. As we know, at Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender, and 10, diversity. Now that leads me into the question that was asked here, was it says, I'm a bit disappointed that Goal 5, gender equality, has so little narrative. On reflection, I'm surprised that it hasn't been inextricably linked to all the other goals. Well, I know that it is linked to the goals, and the reason why I highlighted that it's been part of the conversation in the group that's here, etc., is so that you can come forward and give our member a view in terms of that Sustainable Development Goal, gender equality, and have a discussion point. So over to you, panel. Who would like to get first?
I mean, I'm happy to start. I think that that's a very good point. I think perhaps sometimes, in my mind, it is inextricably linked, I suppose, to start by saying that. I think gender equality, but diversity and inclusion within the industry is absolutely paramount to everything that's done going forwards. And in some ways, perhaps it's a challenge for us and a fault on our part for not making that explicit enough, and something that we need to do going forward, because I think it is an assumption that underpins our work, but we do need to make sure that that's at the front and center of each of our efforts. I think for me, the Sustainable Development Goals, I think operationalizing them is a really interesting point, and one that Eddie's been speaking about. But there are certain goals in particular that jump out at me, because I think CIOB has a great opportunity to integrate them into efforts around the world and initiatives that are already going on. Things like sustainable cities and communities, things like resource and energy use, and underpinning all of those does have to be how we create an industry that's diverse and inclusive, particularly regarding gender equality, because it's no surprise that there's a massive skills shortage in the industry, which means that immediately 50% of the potential workforce isn't being included, isn't being addressed. And so I think that is a really good point, and one that speaks to the fact that we do need to be clear at every stage how Goal 5 is going to feed into each program of work moving forward. And I know we have a new head of EDI at CIOB who's doing great work on this front, but it's something that I think we are always keen to hear opinions on and ideas on.
Fantastic. So to our questioner, I'd say that inclusion does and equality does run through what we do at the CIOB. As as a main headline. And I think that speaks a lot to what David Stockdale was saying in terms of the areas that we do need to be addressing, because that's just part of what is included in the Sustainable Development Goals. And thank you for that, Felicity. I'm going to move on to another question. And this question is, different countries have their own uniqueness of contexts. And in terms of Sustainable Development Goals, we know that in the global south, people will be far greater impacted. But as David said, we work all over the world. We can be active in many of the areas of the different Sustainable Development Goals. So the questioner asks, how can the CIOB ensure, while developing global sustainability strategies, that we are also sensitive to meet local conditions? And I guess what goes hand in hand is that Sustainable Development Goals is about global policy to local action. So over to you on that particular question. I'll just frame it once again. How can the CIOB ensure, while developing global sustainability strategies, that are also sensitive to meeting local conditions?
Can I chip in with that one?
Yes. Over to
Going
you.
back to the global role of the CIOB, and COP26 being a catalyst for various individual countries specifying what their needs are. What the CIOB could do, which I've advocated before, is that the CIOB is not going to put tanks on the lawn to say, this is the way we're going to do it, this is our model, this is the framework, off we go. Because that's the wrong thing to do for obvious reasons. Every culture is different. We need culturally sensitive people to actually engage with them. But the way I see it is that a country asks the CIOB if in some way they can facilitate what they want to do. Nobody's going to parachute in and say, this is the right way to do it, we're going to do it this way. There has to be a systems approach, a multi-stakeholder approach. And that is facilitated basically via a series of workshops, a series of questionnaires, feedback, before you do anything to actually implement an agreed framework. That way we'll pick up cultural differences and hopefully allay any fears that they may have in terms of gender equality or any other culturally sensitive SDG. So what I'm saying is we actually engage with the people so we can gauge trust, communication and commitment together. That's the way I would see it happening.
Yeah, I think you touch on an interesting and the right point, David. From my perspective, certainly on the policy side, I'm a great fan of individual approaches. You can't take a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to understand the environment that you're working in as well, in terms of state level government, national government, or federal approaches in certain global regions as well. And for me, it's about understanding who it is you actually need to be talking to make the impact that you need to require, the impact that's required. And it's really about understanding a number of those locally sensitive issues and how government and how structures actually work in terms of policy development. And that's the key issue for me. And one of the things that we are looking at CIOB and we have instigated is making sure that we do have the right policy people on the ground who can actually help with that kind of interface. Because you might have the greatest message to pass on to policymakers or stakeholders or trying to get involved in the conversation, but if you're not talking to the right people or avoiding the right interfaces, your message will just get lost in the wash. So for me, it's about actually making sure we've got the right infrastructure in terms of that engagement on the ground. And key to that will be members as well, who can actually bring that local knowledge to bear and can help us actually navigate through the frameworks or through the stakeholders and get that level of understanding firmly placed at the centre of the conversation. So for me, that's the key issue, is, you know, we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach, but we actually individualise that engagement at the global level, and we get it right. And I think that's how we actually start to shift perhaps that impression that may still be around, that CIOB is more to the back of the queue than the front of the queue on some of these conversations. We just need to somersault our way through to the front of the queue and actually make sure that we're dealing with the right people and organisations and stakeholders. So it's a blended approach effectively, but very much along the lines of what David kind of outlined just now.
And this is exactly what we intend to do at the CIOB, which is why we're having these conversations with you. It is about engagement, collaboration, and involving people in the decisions that are made in their area and the budgets that are being made available. There are huge sums that are encouraging organisations, incentivizing them to work in more sustainable areas.
Yeah, I think
So,
just to finish off on that, you know, our biggest asset really are our members.
yes.
They understand their local environment, they understand how it works, and why wouldn't we want to energize that in a way that actually becomes more constructive, more engaged, and actually gives us the right leap forward in terms of how we actually get the right results with certainly policymakers at a local, regional, state, federal level as well. And you know, there's many complications in all of that, but actually you can simplify it into an approach that works, I think, at the local level.
So I'm afraid, there being no further time for questions, we should thank our speaker, David Stockdale, and our panel, and the organisations that made them available to us today, again in that time-honoured way. And may I thank all of you again as our members for the stimulating excellence of the questions that you've asked. And we could have gone on for a further period of time, and perhaps, who knows, we may return to this subject. As we enter the final closing period, I must say how promising it is to see so many trustees and hub members and board members attending today's event to discuss how the CIOB can implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I see the value captured by organisations that I've trained and supported when they gain competitive advantage, favourable access to capital, and gaining market share. As David's presentation showed, Sustainable Development Goals are an all-encompassing drive to end global poverty, improve health, improve education, generate economic growth, reduce inequality, and of course, tackle climate change. I'm sure that we can all agree that these are global imperatives, and it is exciting and important for the CIOB to facilitate progress towards each of the goals. The past year has highlighted several areas where we as an industry, and also as a society in general, have collaborated to meet new challenges. Construction has shown that the industry is capable of working together to respond to continue even through a global pandemic. We must now put this energy into ensuring that the built environment tackles the UN Sustainable Development Goals, making a better place both for generations now and the generations to come. Given the complexities of the task that we face, we can't just rely on individuals within the industry to lead on this. We must also look to professional bodies and governments to lend their weight, lend their support to small and large companies to address and action the change that needs to be made. The next UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, otherwise known as COP, will be COP26, It's only 4 months away in Glasgow. It's just around the corner. And the CIOB has been actively engaged in various discussions taking place with UK policymakers, just as you've heard in the discussion. However, we recognise that more needs to be done. So we have a raft of other events taking place this month, which focus on some of the themes of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where you can extend your learning on key construction and built environment issues. Some will have panels, but not all will. But I can say they are all worth attending. You can find out more by visiting the CIOB's event page at www.ciob.org/events. Members, we work hard at the CIOB to support and advise a progressive industry providing buildings, infrastructure and public realm, advancing on the challenges that we face. The CIOB Academy at www.ciobacademy.org provides training focused on making your companies more profitable and fit for purpose to meet current industry needs. At this time, however, a Sustainable Development Goal and Reporting Leadership module understandably needs to be added. It's important that we are not left behind. And whilst we are talking about helping ourselves as well as helping others, remember the CIOB has a benevolent fund that provides a service to support our members that find themselves in difficult circumstances for reasons of hardship or mental health, and they might not know where to turn. All inquiries are treated in the strictest of confidence. Just go to www.ciobbenevolentfund, that's all one word, .org.uk. For those wishing to support our colleagues and show goodwill to all women and men, you can donate to the Benevolent Fund at the same website. Just click the green donate button. I'd like to thank you for your generosity and thank you for attending. From me, Kai Bangbola, and our speaker, David Stockdale, and our panel, Felicity Handley and Eddie Tuttle, and of course CIOB headquarters, goodbye and stay safe.